She was just the chicken lady, until a wounded cowboy slept in her barn. If you've ever been laughed at for being too soft, too quiet, too small to matter, this story is for you. And if you believe a wounded soul can find healing in the hands of someone forgotten, stay with us. Because at minute 3, a cowboy will bleed onto her hay, and at dawn he'll never want to leave. The sun rose over Red Hollow, Texas, painting the dusty main street in shades of amber and regret. It was 1879, and in this forgotten corner of the world, Clara Jane Holloway had earned herself a cruel nickname that followed her like a shadow wherever she went: the Chicken Lady. At 27, Clara lived alone on a small ranch 3 miles outside town, in a house that seemed to lean against the wind like an old man against a walking stick. The paint peeled from the barn walls, the fence posts tilted at impossible angles, and the whole place had the look of something the world had decided to forget. But Clara's garden bloomed with defiant beauty. Her vegetables grew in perfect rows, and her chickens were the healthiest, happiest birds in 3 counties. Every morning, Clara would step out into the cool dawn air and greet her feathered companions, like old friends. She knew each hen by name, understood their moods, and celebrated their small victories. To the people of Red Hollow, this made her an oddity, a woman too soft for the harsh realities of frontier life. They whispered that she cared more for chickens than people, that she'd rather talk to birds than find herself a husband. They weren't entirely wrong, but they missed the deeper truth. Clara had learned that animals were often kinder than humans, more loyal than lovers, and infinitely more grateful for simple acts of care. When Clara walked into town with her basket full of perfect eggs and fresh vegetables, the men would nudge each other and grin. Jake Morrison, who considered himself the town's unofficial entertainer, would always have something to say. "Look here, boys, it's the Chicken Lady. Clara, have you found yourself a rooster yet, or are you still waiting for one to propose?" His laughter would echo off the wooden storefronts, and Clara would feel her cheeks burn with embarrassment. The women were no kinder, though their cruelty came wrapped in false concern. "Poor dear," they'd whisper, "living all alone with those birds. It's not natural for a woman her age. She's getting stranger by the day." But Clara endured it all, with quiet dignity, selling her goods, buying her supplies, and returning to the sanctuary of her ranch, where the only voices that mattered belonged to creatures who appreciated her gentle touch and steady presence. The evening started like any other, with Clara feeding her chickens and checking the fence line. But the western sky had turned an ominous shade of green-black, and the wind carried a charge that made the animals restless. The chickens clustered near their coop, sensing danger in the air, while her old dog Rex paced nervously by the porch. When the storm hit, it came with the fury of divine judgment. Lightning split the sky like God's own axe, and thunder shook the ground beneath Clara's feet. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows and tearing at anything not nailed down tight. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the sharp crack of breaking wood. Through the rain-lashed window, she saw her fence posts snapping like twigs in the gale. Her chickens were scattered, terrified, and running in all directions as their safe world collapsed around them. Without hesitation, Clara grabbed her shawl and plunged into the storm. The rain hit her like cold bullets, soaking through her dress. In seconds, she stumbled across the muddy yard, calling to her frightened birds, gathering them in her arms like children fleeing a fire. "Come on, girls, this way! Henrietta, don't you dare hide under that wagon!" She herded them toward the barn, her voice barely audible above the wind's roar. Each rescue felt like a small victory against the chaos of nature. By the time Clara had secured the last of her chickens in the barn, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind the steady drumbeat of rain on the roof. She stood in the doorway, wringing water from her shawl, when Rex began to bark with unusual urgency. The old dog stood rigid by the barn's far corner, his hackles raised, staring into the shadows with the intensity of a creature sensing a predator. Clara had never seen him behave this way. Rex was gentle and friendly to everyone who visited the ranch. "What is it, boy? What's got you so worked up?" She approached cautiously, and there in the soft mud near the back of the barn, she saw them, boot prints, large ones made by someone heavy enough to sink deep into the wet earth. The prints led from the direction of the main road straight to her barn and then seemed to stop. Clara's heart began to pound. In all her years living alone, no one had ever approached her property without permission, certainly not in the middle of a storm. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and anyone from town would have knocked on her front door. These prints belonged to a stranger, someone who had sought shelter in her barn while she was battling the storm, someone who might still be there. Rex's growl grew deeper and more insistent. Whatever or whoever was in that barn, Clara was going to have to face it. She picked up a pitchfork that leaned against the wall, though her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the handle. Clara pushed open the barn door wider, letting the grey stormlight spill across the hay-strewn floor. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just her tools hanging on their hooks, feed sacks stacked against the walls, and the old milk cow Bessie chewing contentedly in her stall. Then she saw him. A man lay crumpled in the far corner, half hidden behind a pile of hay bales. His dark hair was matted with rain and dust, his clothes torn and mud-stained. One arm hung at an odd angle, and a dark stain spread across his shirt. Blood, fresh and still flowing from a wound in his shoulder. A revolver lay in the straw beside him, within easy reach of his good hand. Clara's first instinct was to run, to flee back to the house and bar the door. But as she watched, the stranger's chest rose and fell with the labored breathing of someone, fighting to stay alive. His face, even dirty and weathered as it was, seemed young, maybe 30 at most, and there was something vulnerable about the way he lay there, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Her fear battled with her nature, the part of her that couldn't turn away from any creature in pain. This was how she'd always been, unable to ignore suffering, even when helping might put her in danger. "Mister," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mister, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open, blue eyes bright as summer sky even in the dim light. They fixed on her face with an expression of confusion and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Did I die?" he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Or is this heaven with chickens?" Clara set down the pitchfork and knelt beside the wounded stranger, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. Up close, she could see that the bullet wound in his shoulder was serious but not fatal, if she could stop the bleeding and keep infection at bay. "Don't try to move," she said, her voice taking on the calm authority she used with frightened animals. "You've lost a lot of blood." She ran back to the house and returned with a clean cloth torn from her oldest sheets, a basin of warm water, and her mother's sewing kit. The stranger watched her every movement with those startling blue eyes, as if trying to memorize her face. Clara worked with gentle efficiency, cleaning the wound and applying pressure to stop the bleeding. The man hissed in pain but didn't cry out. She could tell he was fighting to stay conscious, to not appear weak in front of her. "What's your name?" she asked, more to keep him talking than from curiosity. "Bo Jack Carter," he managed between gritted teeth. "And you're an angel. Has to be. Angels always smell like fresh bread and lavender." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "I'm Clara Holloway. And I'm no angel, Mr. Carter. Just someone who can't stand to see a creature suffering." As she worked, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being truly needed. Her hands, so often dismissed as useful only for collecting eggs and tending chickens, were now saving a man's life. There was power in that, a purpose that filled the hollow spaces in her heart. "There," she said finally, securing the bandage. "That should hold. But you need rest and proper doctoring." Bojack tried to sit up, then thought better of it. "Can't go to town, can't let anyone know I'm here." "Why not?" His eyes darkened. "Because good men are hunting me for doing the right thing." Clara helped Bojack into the house as dawn broke over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. She settled him on the small sofa in her living room, building up the fire to chase away the chill that had settled in his bones. The room was simple but comfortable, filled with small touches that spoke of a woman who found joy in making a house into a home. Wildflowers in mason jars, quilts folded over chair backs, and books stacked on every available surface. The air smelled of baking bread and the lavender she hung in bunches from the ceiling beams. Bojack looked around with wonder, as if he'd stumbled into a fairy tale. "How long has it been since you've had company, Miss Holloway?" Clara poured him coffee from the pot that always sat warming on her stove. "It's been a while. Most folks in town think I'm peculiar." "Peculiar how?" She sat in the chair across from him, suddenly self-conscious. "They call me the chicken lady, say I care more for birds than people." Bojack studied her face, noting the way her eyes dropped when she mentioned the cruel nickname and the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her coffee cup. "Maybe that's because birds appreciate kindness more than most people do," he said quietly. "I've known plenty of men who were meaner than any animal I ever met." The simple validation brought tears to Clara's eyes. When was the last time someone had defended her choices instead of mocking them? "Why are you running, Mr. Carter?" Bojack's expression hardened. "I worked for a man named Colonel Blackwood, who thought he was bringing justice to the frontier. Turned out he was just another snake in a fancy uniform, using his badge to steal land from folks who couldn't fight back." He shifted on the sofa, his wound clearly paining him. "Last week we rode to a homestead outside Amarillo. Blackwood said the family there were harboring criminals, but when we arrived, all I saw was a woman and her 3 children, scared half to death." Clara leaned forward, drawn into his story despite herself. "Blackwood ordered us to burn them out. When I refused, when I stood between him and that family..." Bojack touched his wounded shoulder. "He decided I was the criminal. So now, you're running. Now I'm running. And if they find me here, Miss Holloway, they'll assume you're helping me. That puts you in danger." Clara looked at this wounded stranger, who was more concerned for her safety than his own, and felt something stir in her chest that had been dormant for years. Trust, and something deeper, more dangerous. "Let me worry about my own safety, Mr. Carter. Right now you need rest." 2 days later, Clara was in town buying supplies when she noticed the strangers. 4 men in dusty black coats stood outside the sheriff's office, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. They had the look of professional hunters, cold eyes, careful movements, and hands that never strayed far from their guns. Clara ducked into the general store and pretended to examine bolts of fabric while she listened to the conversation outside. "We're looking for a man named Bojack Carter," one of the strangers was saying to Sheriff Morrison. "Deserter, thief, dangerous. Haven't seen anyone matching that description," the sheriff replied, but Clara could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Morrison was a decent man, but not brave. He wouldn't stand up to these men if they pressed him. "He's wounded," another voice added. "Might have sought help from someone. We're offering $100 for information leading to his capture." $100. That was more money than most people in Red Hollow saw in a year. Clara's heart pounded as she realized how many of her neighbors would sell her out for that kind of reward, especially if they believed they were turning in a criminal. She bought her supplies quickly and headed home, her mind racing. Bojack was stronger now, but still in no condition to run. If these men started searching homesteads, that evening she told him about the hunters. Bojack listened in grim silence, then began to struggle to his feet. "I have to go tonight. I won't bring trouble to your door." "You can barely stand," Clara protested. "And where would you go?" "Doesn't matter. I won't let them hurt you because of me." Clara caught his arm, steadying him. "They won't find you here. I'll make sure of it." "How?" She looked at him with eyes full of quiet determination. "Because everyone thinks I'm just the crazy chicken lady. Who would imagine I'd be brave enough to hide a wanted man?" That night, as rain drummed softly on the roof, Clara and Bojack sat by the fire sharing the simple supper she'd prepared. The intimacy of the moment, 2 people alone in the lamplight sharing food and quiet conversation, felt both natural and miraculous to Clara. "Tell me about your family," she said, genuinely curious about the man who had stumbled into her solitary world. Bojack stared into the fire, his expression distant. "No family to speak of. Parents died when I was 12, cholera. Been on my own since then, doing whatever work I could find to stay alive. That's a hard way to grow up. Made me strong. Maybe too strong for my own good." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. "What about How does a woman end up alone on a ranch talking to chickens? Clara's cheeks reddened, but she didn't look away. I wasn't always alone. My parents left me this place when they died 5 years ago, and I was engaged once. What happened? His name was Thomas Mitchell. We were to be married in the spring of '74. He went to California to make his fortune and promised he'd send for me when he got established. Her voice grew quiet. That was 10 years ago, still waiting for that letter. Bojack felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had abandoned such a treasure. His loss. Most days I tell myself that, but sometimes late at night I wonder if maybe I wasn't worth coming back for. Clara. Bojack's voice was firm, commanding her attention. Any man who would leave you behind is a fool, a blind, stupid fool. The conviction in his voice, the way he said her name like it was something precious, made Clara's heart skip. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such certainty, such respect? I've been thinking, Bojack continued, about what you said. About people not valuing soft things. Maybe that's the problem with this world. We've forgotten that soft things are often the strongest. Water carves through stone, Clara. Patience conquers mountains. Kindness changes hearts. Is that what I'm doing? Changing your heart? Bojack met her eyes across the flickering firelight. Ma'am, you already have. Over the next few days, as Bojack's strength returned, he began helping Clara with the ranch work. His wound prevented him from doing heavy lifting, but he could mend fences, repair the chicken coop door that had been sticking for months, and fix the loose board on the front porch that Clara had learned to step over without thinking. And working. Together they fell into an easy rhythm. Clara would point out what needed doing, and Bojack would find a way to do it, often improving on her original plans. The ranch began to look less like a place forgotten by the world and more like a home, where people took pride in their surroundings. Hand me that hammer, Bo, Jack called from where he knelt fixing the chicken coop. Clara passed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange, such a small contact, but it sent warmth shooting up her arm. You're good at this, she observed, watching him work with practiced efficiency. Man learns to fix things when he's got no money to pay someone else to do it. He glanced up at her, squinting against the sun. Besides, I like making things better. Feels good to build instead of destroy. That afternoon, Clara taught him how to collect eggs properly. You have to be gentle, she explained, guiding his large calloused hands with her smaller ones. They trust you not to hurt them. Bojack marveled at the warmth of the fresh eggs and at the way the hens clucked contentedly around Clara as if she were their protector and friend. You really do talk to them. They're good listeners, better than most people. What do you tell them? Clara blushed. Silly things, my worries, my dreams. Sometimes I tell them stories. Tell me one. Oh, you don't want to hear my foolish stories. Try me. So Clara, emboldened by his genuine interest, told him about the adventures she imagined for her chickens, epic journeys to find the perfect nesting spot, romantic comedies involving rival roosters, and dramatic tales of protecting the coop from foxes. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, her hands moving expressively, and Bojack found himself completely enchanted by this woman who could find magic in the mundane. You should write these down, he said, when she finished a particularly elaborate tale about Henrietta's secret life as a chicken detective. Who would want to read stories about chickens? Anyone with sense enough to appreciate wonder when they see it. That evening, Clara did something she hadn't done since Thomas left. She imagined a future that included someone else. Not just anyone. This wounded cowboy who saw beauty in her strange little world, who made her feel like her gentleness was a gift rather than a weakness. It was on the fourth morning that Bojack witnessed something that would change everything between them. He had risen early, his wound finally healed enough to allow normal movement, and had gone to the barn to feed Bessie the cow. Through the window he saw Clara in the chicken yard, holding a single brown egg up to the morning light. But she wasn't examining it for cracks or imperfections as he'd seen her do before. She was simply holding it, cradling it in her palms, like something infinitely precious. Tears ran down her cheeks as she looked at that ordinary egg, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of wonder, of gratitude for the simple miracle of life continuing, of creation happening every single day in her care. Bojack stood, transfixed, watching this woman weep over an egg with the kind of reverence most people reserved for religious experiences. In that moment, he understood something profound about Clara that he'd been circling around for days. She didn't just care for these creatures, she saw them, really saw them. She understood that every life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, mattered. Her gentleness wasn't weakness. It was a form of strength so rare and pure that most people couldn't recognize it. When Clara came inside for breakfast, Bojack was waiting with coffee and the eggs she'd cooked for him every morning since he'd been strong enough to sit at the table. "Clara," he said, quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why would a woman so kind, so full of life and wonder, choose to live so alone?" Clara sat down across from him, considering the question seriously. "I didn't choose it exactly. It chose me. When people don't value soft things, when they mock gentleness and laugh at tenderness, you learn to protect those parts of yourself by keeping them hidden. But hiding them means the world doesn't get to see what it's missing, and showing them means risking having them crushed." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I learned early that my heart breaks too easily for this hard world." Bojack reached across the table and took her hand in both of his. Her skin was soft but marked with small scars from years of work, each one a testament to her dedication. "What if I told you that your heart, that soft, breakable heart, is the most valuable thing I've ever seen? What if I said that, in all my years of wandering, all the towns I've been through and people I've met, I've never encountered anyone who made me want to be better just by being in the same room?" Clara's breath caught. "Bojack, I'm falling in love with you, Clara Jane Holloway, with your chicken stories and your gentle hands and the way you cry over eggs, because you understand that every single life is a miracle. I'm falling in love with your too soft heart and your too kind ways, because they're exactly what this world needs more of." Clara had dreamed of hearing words like these for so long that she almost couldn't believe they were real. "But you're leaving. When you're healed, when it's safe, you'll go." "What if I didn't want to go? What if I wanted to stay here and help you raise the most spoiled chickens in Texas? What if I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever calls you the chicken lady again without saying it with respect? Is that what you want?" Bojack brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "Clara, I never knew what I wanted until I woke up in your barn. I never needed a place, I needed a person. I needed you." The days that followed were like something out of Clara's most secret dreams. She and Bojack worked together as if they'd been partners for years, their movements synchronized, their conversations flowing from practical matters to deep philosophical discussions to comfortable silences. Bojack proved to be endlessly curious about Clara's world. He wanted to know the names of all her chickens, the stories behind her vegetable garden, and the history of every building on the ranch. More importantly, he listened to her answers, as if they were the most fascinating things he'd ever heard. "Tell me about Henrietta again," he said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "She's the one with the detective agency?" Clara laughed, the sound like silver bells in the desert air. "You're making fun of me." "I'm not. I love your stories. They make the world seem bigger somehow, full of possibilities I never imagined." "When I was little," Clara said, "my mother used to tell me that every creature has a secret life we can't see. She said if we paid attention, if we really watched and listened, we might catch glimpses of it." "Smart woman. She would have liked you. She always said the best kind of man was one who could see magic in ordinary things." Bojack turned to look at her, noting how the dying light caught the red highlights in her hair, and how peaceful she looked in this moment. "What about your father?" Papa was quieter. He showed love through his actions, fixing things, building things, and making sure we were safe and comfortable. He taught me that taking care of others is one of the highest callings there is. "Is that why you took care of me, your father's teachings?" Clara considered this. "Partly, but mostly because I couldn't bear to see you suffering. It physically hurt me to watch you in pain." "That's what I mean about your heart being too soft. Most people would have been afraid and would have protected themselves first. And you think that makes me foolish? I think it makes you extraordinary." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Clara's chickens settle in for the night. In the distance, a coyote howled, and Henrietta answered with an indignant cluck that made them both smile. "Bojack?" Clara said softly. "Yes?" "When this is over, when those men stop looking for you, what happens then?" It was the question they'd both been avoiding, the shadow hanging over their growing happiness. Bojack took her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to find out what then looks like. But I know I don't want to find out without you. What if they never stop looking? What if you can never be safe here? Then we'll figure something else out. Together." Clara squeezed his hand. "Together. I like the sound of that." The next morning brought an unexpected complication in the form of young Billy Henderson, the town's unofficial mail carrier. Clara rarely received mail, so when Billy rode up to the ranch with a letter in his hand, both she and Bojack were immediately alert. "Morning, Miss Clara," Billy called, dismounting from his horse. "Got a letter for you, come all the way from California." Clara's face went white. California. There was only one person who would write to her from California. With trembling hands, she took the envelope, noting the unfamiliar handwriting that definitely wasn't Thomas Mitchell's familiar script. Bojack watched from the porch, every muscle tense. He'd heard enough about Clara's past to know what this letter might mean, and the thought of losing her to a ghost from her past made his chest tight with panic. After Billy left, Clara stood in the yard holding the unopened letter like it might explode. Bojack approached carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. "You going to open it?" "I don't know if I want to." "Want me to do it?" Clara shook her head. "No, I need to face this myself." She tore open the envelope with quick, decisive movements before she could lose her nerve. The letter was short, written in a woman's careful handwriting. Clara read it through once, then again, her expression cycling through confusion, sadness, and finally, a strange kind of relief. "What does it say?" Bojack asked gently. Clara looked up at him, tears in her eyes, but also something like freedom. "It's from Thomas's wife. His wife, Bojack. They've been married for 8 years. She found some old letters from me among his things and thought I should know that he died in a mining accident last month." Bojack felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that this man could never come back to claim Clara, anger at the coward who had abandoned her, and deep sympathy for the pain this news must be causing her. "I'm sorry, Clara." "Don't be." Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. "I mourned Thomas Mitchell a long time ago. I mourned the future I thought we'd have, and the promises he made and broke. This letter, it's not bringing me news, it's bringing me closure." "How so?" Clara took Bojack's hands in hers, looking directly into his eyes with a clarity she'd never felt before. "For 10 years I've been waiting for a man who was never coming back. I've been holding on to a dream that was already dead. But now I know, I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not the woman who sits around hoping someone will choose her." "What kind of woman are you?" Clara smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "I'm the kind of woman who chooses for herself. And I choose you, Bojack Carter. Not because you're my only option, not because I'm grateful you stumbled into my barn, but because in these past weeks, you've shown me what it feels like to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for exactly who I am." Bojack pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the dusty yard while the chickens scattered in indignant protest. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "I choose you too, Clara Jane Holloway, today, tomorrow, and every day after that." Their happiness was interrupted that afternoon by the sound of approaching horses. Bojack tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward where his gun would normally hang, but Clara placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's okay. I recognize that horse. It's just Sheriff Morrison." Sheriff Morrison rode up alone, his expression troubled. He was a decent man in his 50s, worn down by years of trying to keep peace in a town that attracted more than its share of trouble. Afternoon, Clara. Mind if I water my horse? Of course not, Sheriff. What brings you out this way? Morrison dismounted and led his horse to the trough, but his eyes kept darting to Bojack, who had stepped slightly behind Clara in a futile attempt to appear less conspicuous. Those men who came through town last week, they're getting impatient, started offering $200 for information about this Carter fellow. That's enough money to turn friends into enemies. Clara's heart sank. What are you saying, Sheriff? I'm saying word's getting around that you might have seen something. Jake Morrison's been telling anyone who'll listen that you've been buying extra supplies and acting strange. People are starting to wonder. Bojack stepped forward. Sheriff, I don't want Miss Holloway involved in this. If there's something you need to know... Son, Morrison interrupted, I've been sheriff here for 15 years. I know the difference between a criminal and a man who's been wronged. Those bounty hunters, they're not lawmen, they're hired guns working for someone with deep pockets and a grudge. Clara felt a surge of gratitude toward the sheriff, but also fear, if even he could see through their attempts at secrecy. What do you suggest? We do, she asked. Morrison looked around the ranch, taking in the improved fences, the repaired buildings, and the general air of prosperity that had settled over the place since Bojack's arrival. I suggest you learn to protect what's yours. Both of you. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a gun belt with a Colt 45 in a worn leather holster. This belonged to my daddy. Clara, you're going to need to know how to use it. Clara stared at the weapon as if it were a snake. Sheriff, I don't know how to... Then it's time you learned, Bojack said firmly. If they come here, if they threaten you because of me, you need to be able to defend yourself. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bojack began teaching Clara to shoot. They set up bottles on fence posts 50 yards from the house, and Bojack showed her how to hold the gun, how to sight down the barrel, and how to squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it. Clara's first shot went wide, the recoil knocking her backward into Bojack's chest. She was shaking, overwhelmed by the violence implicit in the weapon. I can't do this, she whispered. This isn't who I am. Bojack steadied her, his hands covering hers on the gun. You don't have to become someone else, Clara. You just have to learn to protect the life you've built, the creatures who depend on you. What if someone gets hurt? Then you'll deal with that when it happens, but right now your job is to make sure you survive to take care of your chickens tomorrow morning. Something about the way he framed it, not as violence for its own sake, but as protection for the things she loved, helped Clara find her center. Her next shot shattered a bottle cleanly. There, Bojack said, pride evident in his voice. You're a natural. I don't feel natural. Good. The day violence feels natural is the day you've lost something important. But knowing you can defend yourself, that's freedom, Clara. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, just as Clara was heading out to feed her chickens. She heard the thunder of approaching horses and looked up to see 4 riders cresting the hill, their black coats unmistakable against the pale morning sky. Bojack, she called, but he was already moving, grabbing his gun from where he'd kept it close at hand for days. The bounty hunters spread out as they approached, clearly professionals who knew how to corner their prey. The leader, a thin man, with cold eyes and a carefully waxed mustache, called out when they were still 50 yards away. We know you're in there, Carter. Come out peacefully and the woman doesn't get hurt. Bojack looked at Clara, his face grim. Get in the house, bar the door, whatever happens, don't come out until it's over. I'm not leaving you. Clara, no. Her voice was firm and steady. We're in this together, remember? You said so. Yourself. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut off further argument. The 4 men had split up, 2 approaching from the front, 1 circling toward the barn, and 1 heading for the back of the house. They were trying to eliminate any escape routes. Last chance, Carter, the leader called. Walk out now or we come in shooting. Bojack stepped onto the porch, his hands visible but close to his weapon. I'm here, let's settle this between us. The woman has nothing to do with it. Afraid it doesn't work that way. She's been harboring a fugitive. That makes her an accessory. Clara appeared beside Bojack, the sheriff's heavy Colt in her hand, but held with surprising steadiness. The bounty hunters hadn't expected this. Their intelligence had described her as a harmless eccentric, not an armed defender. This is my land, Clara called out, her voice carrying across the morning air with unexpected authority. "You're not welcome here," the leader laughed. "Lady, you're in no position to make demands. You're outnumbered 4-2, and I doubt you've ever fired that gun in anger." "You're right," Clara said calmly. "I haven't. But I've been practicing all week, and I'm protecting my home. That makes me considerably more dangerous than you might expect." The tension stretched tight as a wire. Clara could hear her chickens clucking nervously in their coop, could smell the morning coffee still warm on her stove, and could feel Bojack's presence beside her like a steadying force. Then the shooting started. The leader drew first, but Bojack was faster, his bullet taking the man in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. Clara dove behind the porch railing as bullets splintered the wood around her, but she came up shooting, her first shot going wide, but her second taking down the man approaching from her left. The battle was fierce, but brief. These men were killers, but they were also overconfident, used to intimidating farmers and shopkeepers rather than facing determined defenders on their home ground. Bojack's experience and Clara's desperate courage proved to be a formidable combination. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the bounty hunters were dead, 1 was wounded and fleeing on foot, and the leader sat in the dust clutching his shattered shoulder. "This isn't over," he snarled at Bojack. "Colonel Blackwood won't forget this." "Tell the colonel that Bojack Carter is done running," Bojack replied. "He wants to settle this. He knows where to find me." As the wounded man struggled to mount his horse and ride away, Clara stood in her yard looking at the aftermath of violence in her peaceful sanctuary. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading and leaving her weak-kneed. Bojack pulled her into his arms, and she could feel his heart pounding against her chest. "It's over," he murmured. "You were incredible." "I killed a man," Clara whispered, the reality of it hitting her. "You protected your home. You protected me. You did what you had to do." Clara looked around at her ranch, at the bullet holes in her porch, at the blood in her yard, at her chickens huddled fearfully in their coop. Then she looked at Bojack, alive and whole beside her, and made her peace with what she'd done. "I'd do it again," she said quietly. "For this place. For you. For us." That evening, as they worked together to repair the damage from the morning's battle, the people of Red Hollow began arriving. Word had spread about the gunfight, about Clara's courage, and about the woman they'd dismissed as a harmless eccentric, proving herself to be anything but harmless when her home was threatened. Sheriff Morrison was the first to arrive, followed by several townspeople who had never bothered to visit Clara's ranch before. They came curious, maybe a little ashamed of how they'd treated her, and definitely impressed by what they'd heard. "Clara?" said Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, who had often made cutting remarks about Clara's unmarried state. "We heard what happened. We wanted to make sure you were all right." Clara accepted their concern graciously, but Bojack could see. The irony wasn't lost on her. Where had this concern been during all the years she'd lived alone, struggling to maintain her ranch, enduring their mockery and dismissal? "We're fine," Clara said simply. "Thank you for coming." As the visitors eventually departed, promising to bring food and help with repairs, Clara and Bojack found themselves alone on the porch as the sun set behind the western hills. "Things are going to be different now," Bojack observed. "They see you differently. Because I can shoot? Because you stood up for yourself? Because you showed them strength they didn't know you had?" Clara leaned against the porch railing, looking out at her domain. "I've always been strong, Bojack. I just showed it in quiet ways they couldn't recognize." "I know. But now they know. It too." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sounds of evening, crickets chirping, cattle lowing in the distance, and the gentle murmur of Clara's chickens settling in for the night. "What happens now?" Clara asked eventually. Bojack took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "Now we build something together. We make this ranch into everything it could be. We raise the happiest chickens in Texas, and we love each other every single day." "What about Colonel Blackwood? What about the danger? Let him come. We'll face it together, just like we did today." Bojack turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "Clara, I want to marry you. I want to wake Up every morning to the sound of you talking to your chickens. I want to spend my days working beside you and my nights holding you close. I want to build a life that's worthy of the woman who saved me in every way a person can be saved. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy this time, not sorrow. Yes, she whispered. Yes, to all of it. As if summoned by their happiness, Henrietta appeared around the corner of the house, followed by the rest of Clara's flock. They gathered around the porch like wedding guests, clucking contentedly as if they approved of this union. Bojack laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering dusk. I think your chickens are giving us their blessing. They're good judges of character, Clara said, smiling through her tears. They knew you belonged here before I did. That night, as they sat together on the porch swing Bojack had built from old barnwood, Clara told him one more story. It was about a lonely woman who talked to chickens because she'd forgotten how to trust people, and a wounded cowboy who taught her that some hearts are worth the risk of breaking. And how does this story end? Bojack, he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Clara smiled, watching her chickens waddle contentedly around the yard, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. It doesn't end, she said. It just gets better. If you believe kindness is louder than a gunshot, if you know that gentle hearts are often the strongest hearts, then you understand why Clara and Bojack's story matters. It's not just about chickens or cowboys. It's about seeing the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones who save us in silence. In a world that often mistakes gentleness for weakness, Clara Jane Holloway proved that the softest hearts can be the most courageous when protecting what they love. She was never just the chicken lady. She was a woman who understood that every life, no matter how small, has infinite value. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, a wounded soul finds healing in the hands of someone the world forgot. Sometimes love really does bloom in silence, and strength really does wear an apron.